Hi, welcome to Planted in the Word. I'm Candace. And this week, if you're reading along with us through scriptures chronologically, in week 34, you're going to finish Jeremiah. And the last 2 days, you are going to read Lamentations. Now, the book of Lamentations doesn't actually state who wrote it, but traditionally speaking, it's thought to be Jeremiah. And that's why it's placed where it is, right behind the book of Jeremiah. Lamentations in English means to basically lament something, right? Great sorrow, grieving over something. But in Hebrew, the book is actually called Echa, which means how. Whether it's how did we get here, or how did this happen, or how is the Lord going to redeem this? We don't know. But that's what the book is called in Hebrew, and it's really a crying out over the destruction of the temple. Now, the temple was destroyed in English in what is called the 9th of Av, but in Hebrew, it's called Tisha B'Av, and that is actually a day of mourning and fasting in Israel, even today. So this whole book of Lamentations is read on the night before Tisha B'Av, and it begins the fast. Interesting story. I actually flew to Israel on El Al Airlines on this date in 1996. And there was a discussion evidently among the airline attendants whether or not they were actually going to feed us because it is a day of fasting. So they decided that because they had both Jews and Gentiles on the plane, they would go ahead and feed us. But in a nod to the fast, they were going to turn off all technology. Now, this is before we all carried our own with us. So it was pretty great to have a TV screen on the back of the chair in front of you, except the only thing we got to watch for 10 and a half hours from Newark to Tel Aviv is that tiny little plane creeping ever so slowly across the map. It was horrible, but it was great to land in Israel, and it was neat to sort of experience this traditional holiday that, as you can see, basically 3,500 years later, 2,500 years later, it is still an honored holiday. It's something that they stop and pause about. Now, why? You have to remember, to the Jews, the temple on top of the Temple Mount was the place where heaven and earth met. That's where the priests, who were supposed to be the communicators between God and man, met with Yahweh. That's where the presence of Yahweh would come down and dwell in the temple. In fact, the Jews were very, you'll see it in some of the other books we've read, warning about the coming consequences for the choices they've been making to worship other gods. The Jews basically were saying things like, the temple will never be destroyed, the name of Yahweh is here, Yahweh would never let us destroy his temple, those kinds of things, because it was such a holy and sacred place. So when the temple was destroyed, what happened was the Jews' ability to commune with God, to meet with him in this place where heaven and earth met, to commune and be in the presence of Yahweh, was gone. So this was a massive paradigm shift outside of just the cultural trauma that this nation had gone through. It's basically, think of Mexico marching into Albuquerque and taking everyone hostage back to Mexico to be their slaves. It's essentially that. They slaughtered people that couldn't make it. They killed and raped the women and children. They just took away everything and took it into exile. And Yahweh allowed this to happen to bring about repentance because of the fact that they had a relationship with the one true God and then walked away from that. So Lamentations is really a crying out over the situation that they have found themselves in. Now, Lamentations is really broken into 5 very easily identifiable parts, 5 chapters. And it's done in a way that was easily recognizable in Hebrew, not so much in English. Now, I have touched on this in another video, which is that in Hebrew, 4 of these 5 chapters, chapters 1 through 4, are actually acrostics. Chapter 5 is not. And it sort of juxtaposes chapter 5 and makes it stand out more because it doesn't follow this poetic literary device that the other chapters have. Now, chapters 1, 2, and 4 all use the Hebrew alphabet, and they follow along verse by verse. The first verse starts with Aleph, the second verse starts with Bet, and they go all the way and they progress all through 22 letters all the way to the end. Now, chapter 3 is a little bit different in that chapter 3 follows the same pattern, starts with Aleph, ends with Tav, but it dedicates 3 verses to each letter. And basically what, if we assume it's Jeremiah, is doing is he's crying out to Yahweh to intercede. And some of the language that he uses is very, what's a great word? It's very descriptive of recognizing the sin that they have committed, the way that they have abandoned their covenant. It's a form of repentance and asking for restoration. It's trying to take Israel through these steps that have to be brought to their knees so that they can be brought back into relationship, that they truly begin to value the relationship with Yahweh and the covenant that they have made again. Now, Lamentations ends almost with a question. Now, Jonah is truly the only book that we have that actually ends with a question. But Lamentations sort of is written, the last and final verse. Some of yours will translations will translate it into English with question marks. As I was studying for this, I noticed that. But basically in Hebrew, it's not necessarily a question other than it's a statement. First part of the last verse being, how is God basically going to redeem this? What are you going to do to actually be able to undo this? So it's really a petition and a cry out to God to recognize what they have done, and they just cannot see how God can redeem it. However, we know that he does, and he ends up bringing the exiles home, which is an amazing story in itself. So I hope that as you read Lamentations this week, you feel like you have a little bit more depth and history behind what's going on, why this was so important and the destruction of the temple was such a profound thing in this ancient Hebrew's life, and that you be able to hear the words and the pleas that the author is using to try and inspire the Lord to redeem them and bring them back. Hope this brings you insight. Thanks for stopping by. Have a good week.